Welcome to the Art Colony, a podcast about art and art history in Provincetown. My name is Gaston Lacombe. When we talk about Provincetown as an art colony, it's generally agreed that this started in 1899 with the foundation of the Cape Cod School of Art by Charles Hawthorne. As I mentioned in a previous episode, there were other artists who had worked in Provincetown before then, but the founding of the Cape Cod School of Art serves as the launching point of a rooted art colony in Provincetown. And this was only the first school of art. Multiple others came after, and countless teachers, students, budding artists, and amateurs passed through Provincetown on their learning journey. And these art schools and teachers had an influence on the development of art, not just locally, but also nationally and internationally. So the presence of art schools has been a major feature in the continuous nature of the art colony, and Provincetown is the oldest continuous art colony in the U.S. Still today, Provincetown is a destination for many people who want to learn how to create art in many disciplines. So this tradition goes on. For this episode of the podcast, I'd like to discuss the role and presence of art schools in Provincetown over the last century and a quarter. And to talk about this, I have with me today Laura Shabott, one of Provincetown's most esteemed artists, teachers, and also, it turns out, historian. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a bit about who you are, about yourself?
Yeah, thanks. I've lived in Provincetown for 30 years and did return to painting as a full-time practice about 12 years ago, but in that time also was writing for Artscope magazine, The Banner, and writing about art history because I was just fascinated by the history of Provincetown. And then Berta Walker, I started working there in 2015. It's
Berta Walker's a local
Berta Walker Gallery.
Yeah.
And Berta Walker is her own podcast. Her family did a lot here, including founding the Fine Arts Work Center, and I work at her gallery. And her relationship to the history of art in Provincetown is phenomenal and does span 100 years. And so in that time, I started to really respect the legacy of our place. And the artists that she shows had studied with Hofmann. So there's two main founders of the art colony in the sense of who brought people here, who attracted people and had them come here. And that was Charles Hawthorne, who you talked about, and Hans Hofmann, who we'll talk about
So let's
today.
start with Charles Hawthorne.
Okay.
So we hear the story. 1899, Charles Hawthorne arrives in Provincetown,
Right.
and it's almost like he plants a flag and says, Cape Cod School of Art.
It is.
Had he come here before? Do we know? Like, how did he know to come to Provincetown?
It's a very interesting question. He had been working in Long Island, and he heard about this place, and he wanted to have his own identity somewhere else. And when he came here, there had not even been tourists. What happened was that he had people from Europe. So to even talk about the art colony, we have to begin in Europe. And that's where Hawthorne had studied. And then he met people there, obviously, and we are all familiar with, or might be familiar with, the whole Picasso, Matisse, Gertrude Stein period of 1913 and 14. And he was a part of that milieu. So he'd summer in Provincetown and then go to Paris in the winters. And the art colony is truly shaped by the world wars, almost completely. And you never really see that cited like, oh, it's the wars that created us. But it was. Because he was here plugging along 1899, 1900 to around 1914, and he kept bringing people here in the summers that would Paris in the winters, right? Similar to our new relationship to Palm Springs and Provincetown.
True.
And the war disrupted everything. So when World War I came, and around 1914, in that time of unrest, the artists that would finish in Paris couldn't go anymore. And so they said, Charles, what are you doing? He said, well, why don't you come to Provincetown? By 1916, this was the largest art colony in America. And it was 3,000 artists came in a
Well, that
summer.
many.
Yes.
Wow.
And, it could even be that that number's a little inflated, but even 1,000 artists in 1916. So a part of how that happened is the perfect storm of the war, Charles Hawthorne and his leadership, but also the train came in from New York, making what was once not available.
Hmm.
And so the train would bring people in from Greenwich Village, the bohemians, the theater people, the artists found out. And they would bring the train and come here. And then it was still a fishing village at that time, and fish would leave. People came off and fish would leave. And there's many iconic pictures of this. And so during that time, also with Hawthorne, he invented what's called the mud head, or he did end plane air painting outdoors. Everyone had a lot of clothes on, hats, it's those iconic pictures with white. But what he taught was color to color, spots of color to spots of color. It was almost an antithesis to his own paintings, which had a Dutch influence. He had
Hmm.
studied, he had studied in the Netherlands, and so he had, while his watercolors were very bright and alive, and the mud heads were high contrast color, his own work was very dark and moody, as you can see at Town Hall.
Yeah, he has a famous painting at Town Hall. What is it called?
It's called First Day, First Voyage.
Yeah, Forced Voyage. It's about a young man about to step on a ship for the first time and
That's
go
right.
on his voyage at sea. I want to step back a little bit. Saw something interesting about the people who would come study in Provincetown. I was in Savannah, Georgia, a few years ago, and I went to their main art museum, and I was very surprised to see multiple paintings about Provincetown, and a few of them from Hawthorne and others from artists from the South. And there was a little description saying that back then, in the early 1900s, of course, the summer in the South was unbearable, was hot and humid. And then these people from richer families would summer on Cape Cod in
Yes.
Provincetown. And then they would take classes with Charles Hawthorne and others and create paintings and bring them back to the South. So in this museum, they had a few paintings from Southern artists that were created in Cape Cod. But who were the people coming? You had those people I just mentioned. You had artists. Did you have other types of people coming to join his school? Who was the typical student?
The typical student for Hawthorne and Hofmann is going to be very different.
Yeah, well, let's talk about Hawthorne first.
The Hawthorne student was usually a woman of means that came from the Midwest, for example, Blanche Lazelle. So the farming families would send their daughters to Cape Cod to study, and as is today, changing, but it was a majority of women.
Hmm.
So it was women with a desire to paint, and their families sent them. And I would say that it was mostly people that had means, had
Hmm.
money. Now, the actors that came were not that. Eugene O'Neill was as poor as a church mouse and came with a trunk of writings,
Hmm.
right? And Susan Glaspell and that whole group didn't necessarily come here from well-to-do families. But that was your artist, a woman who wanted to paint and draw and had heard about Hawthorne, and they came. Marsden Hartley also came around that time, and teachers. So there was 5 schools of art in 1916, of which one has continued, which is the
Okay.
Cape Cod School of Art.
Another one that of these five schools was founded in 1900 by Edwin Ambrose Webster.
Yes.
And I did a bit of research. I thought it was interesting that he opened just 1 year after Hawthorne.
Mm,
And he founded the Summer School of Art in Provincetown in 1900. And one thing I found interesting about him also is that he had been to Provincetown before, and we don't know if Hawthorne's been here before, but he had a quote saying, "Before I went to Paris, which was for him in 1896, I came down on the boat for a day," which was here in Provincetown. The lighthouse and point, referring to Long Point in Provincetown Harbor, the lighthouse and point were all shining in gold, and all behind was all delicate rose. It's a beautiful quote to say how he was impressed by the place, and that inspired him to come here and open a school of art. So Ambrose Webster lived from 1869 to 1935, but from 1900 to 1935, he was settled here, and that was his main residence. But he still returned to Europe on a regular basis, where he worked with a lot of the big names, and he is credited as being the one who first brought modernism to Provincetown. So
Yes.
he had worked with the proto-cubists, if you want to call them that, and the actual cubists. And Albert Glaze
Yes.
had said that he was very talented and he should show his work. But Ambrose Webster did not want to be seen as a non-representational painter because of his school here. So he had
Right.
never really shown that work. He still worked in a more traditional style, sort of like the Fauvists, sort of like Matisse. Bright colors, flattening the planes of his compositions. So he was not necessarily bringing cubism and abstract expressionism here yet, but he was starting the seeds of modernism here. But
Yes.
that really took off with Hans Hofmann.
Yes, it did. And but the fact that there was a modernist thinking here um, came from Paris because of the Armory show came to America in
And
1913.
actually, Ambrose Webster was in the Armory show in 1913.
Yes, and the thing that I think is important because we're both artists and visual artists and have done other things as well, but an artist gets known for one thing a lot of the time. And so there's a signature style that's picked up and discussed and talked about. Hopefully, that's what you want. But then artists experiment with things that you'll never see, such as the modernist
Mhm.
work of Webster.
And just to clarify, for those who might not know what the Armory Show is, in 1913, there was a big modern art show in New York that brought all the big names from Europe, the Picassos and the Matisse,
Yes.
for the very first time in America. That's the
First
first time
time.
that what we now consider to be 20th century art, the modern art, was shown in New York. And it was a sensation. And they had invited a few American artists to show with them, including our friend here, Ambrose Webster. And Marston Hartley was also in that show. And
Yes.
he was a presence in Provincetown in 1916.
Yes.
So it was a very important seminal a moment in American art, the
Mhm.
Armory Show in 1913.
And the artery of New York to Provincetown, Provincetown to New York still exists today. It started with that train, but it kept going. And Hawthorne built a barn, and he built the barn in 1907 called the Hawthorne Barn up on Miller Hill Road. And in present time, that's a part of the nonprofit 20 Summers.
I was just there a few nights ago for a concert. So
Yes.
the barn is still standing. Yeah.
And beautifully preserved by the family that has it now. Um, and so when Hawthorne died in 1930, the barn was left alone for a little while. Now, the climate in 1930 here in Provincetown was arguments between what would be considered classical representational art, landscapes, still lifes, portraiture that look like they represent what we see as reality, and modernism, which was a different kind of play in a surface. All painting in the two dimension is the illusion of three dimension. It's about creating illusion of space. And so you're taking a flat surface and doing things to it to create dimension. Even if it's as simple as a checkerboard. Hoffman is the second iteration of what would be considered a Provincetown founder, and cemented 2 generations over 2 continents. He was born in 1888 in Germany and had a pretty traditional life, went into engineering like his dad, and then he said, "I wanna be a painter." And he went to Paris in the early 1900s, would most likely have met Hawthorne at that time.
Oh, really?
Could have
So
possibly met him.
Hans Hofmann and Charles Hawthorne could have crossed paths at some point.
Absolutely, because Hoffman met the glitter eye as well, the Picasso, the Matisse, and he was in that milieu. He left to go on vacation in Germany, and Paris closed, and France closed because of the First World War. and he was not allowed back in because he was a German national. He lost all of his art.
Oh,
It took over a decade to get reparations. He never saw that art again. So it was that was his first major disruption as a human being, artist. And so he went back to Germany and started his first school in 1915 in Germany, in Munich. He came here to the United States in 1932 and went to Berkeley on the behest of a student at Berkeley that had studied with him in Munich and said, Hans, why don't you come to Berkeley? So he did. And he really liked America. And so he was bouncing around New York, LA, Berkeley, and his wife, Ms., calls and says, war is breaking out here in Germany. Don't come home. So a second time, all that he owns is no longer his home. And so this disruption in him created the foundation for abstract expressionism. Because what people say about Hofmann is that nobody could understand him.
hmm
His German was so thick that you had no idea. Lee Krasner said, I never knew what he was talking about for 6 months. I'd have to ask the assistant, what was he saying? But what every student got from him was this sense of spirit and commitment that being an artist was the most important thing you could ever do, and that your life depended on what you were doing in his classes. He's also the first teacher that we know of uh, that introduced artist talks. So he had a famous Friday evening artist talk where people would bring work
hmm
and he would talk about the work. And that is the first time that that had been done uh, to our knowledge.
So he had an art school in New York.
Yes.
How did he end up in Provincetown?
He ended up in Provincetown through the Matters, Mercedes Matters, who was in the Rockport area. You know, it's the other Cape,
Okay.
okay, from up there. And she said, Hans, we got to bring you to Provincetown. And his students also, you know, this Provincetown, because of the train, this Provincetown, New York artery had taken flight. Hawthorne, even though there was like a brief moment of not much going on for 4 years, the legacy of Hawthorne. You know, everybody thinks that Facebook is the only, you know, that we're the only people that ever knew how to communicate. But communications happened quite a bit between artists in New York and Provincetown. And he had been looking for a summer place, like everyone.
hmm
People want to get out of New York in the summers. And he could have done Long Island or the Hamptons. But he decided to come to Provincetown. Also, Fritz Bultmann, who is to us, a famous abstract expressionist artist, became very close to him. And he found out about Provincetown through him as well.
So, in case some of our listeners are less informed, um, when we talk about abstract expressionism, what is it that we're seeing on the canvas?
The way that Hofmann taught was Cezanne. Okay, so the idea that Gertrude Stein said that when she went in an airplane and looked down, she saw what Cezanne was painting, those
hmm
angular roof-like shapes. And then it moved to Cubism, which had 3 different schools. And so the Cubism brought to us the idea that we could take space and not have it be one point perspective, but have it undulate, but not in the way that Hofmann taught, but that you have your face could be literally out. You know how, like, when they take a world map and they take the globe and they make it into 4 parts? Well, literally, that is what Cubism does by changing the planes of reality. And so then that moved on from Cubism to Hoffman bridging to abstract expressionism. So now why? Abstract expressionism got born in America because we were yearning to end this whole European dependency. We wanted something that was ours. We wanted an art form that was made in America. and this was especially important after World War II. And what Hofmann taught was this fancy word called plasticity, or that the paint is the thing. And he taught that the painting or the creation has a life force of its own, that all good art comes from nature, but really it's the nature of the artist that goes into the painting or canvas or print and creates a life force. And so abstract expressionism is really about the paint itself. It's about the space that the paint uses, how it's applied, and it's also what Hoffman taught was a theory that's coined now as push pull. And what that is a natural law, and you can see it in nature, in your relationships. If somebody pushes, the other person pulls away, right? It's a natural reaction. If you put a car and you bump it against another car, you're going to cause a reaction. And so Hoffman did that with shape, color, form, and line.
Hmm.
And bottom line about abstract expressionism is it's non-objective. Now, not all the abstract expressionists stayed non-objective, but that was the premise of the art form. You're going to evoke emotion through color vibration, through shape, through paint, through gesture, and not through subject matter.
When we think about abstract expressionism, the poster boy is really Jackson Pollock
Yes, it
with
is.
his drip paintings where
Yes.
he was dancing around the canvas.
Right.
And the painting is more about the action. It's more about the
Yes.
moment of creation. And he was one of those people who came to Provincetown. So almost all of the big names that we associate with abstract expressionism, Jackson Pollock, Lee Krasner, who eventually married him, um, the Koenig couple, Elaine and why am I
Willem,
Willem? Why am I blanking on this right now?
it's all right.
And Helen Frankenthaler and Robert Motherwell
Who were
and
married for a while.
yeah, and all of them. They and Mark Rothko, although is he abstract expressionist?
I think of him as one. You could also think that he's in color field.
Yes,
So,
definitely.
Helen Frankenthaler was the first artist to do color field. In fact, here, and she painted her signature style of painting, which was staining and soaking raw canvas, first with oil paint and then with acrylic. There's extraordinary, huge canvases called Provincetown Bay that just take your breath away. And Joan Mitchell was an abstract expressionist who didn't end up here. She ended up going to France, and that's through the segue of the Ninth Street Women. But if you were to go back now to Hawthorne, what happened after Hawthorne was there was the group that still remains true to the en plein air tradition. John Clayton is still teaching for the Cape Cod School of Art to this day. And then another branch, which was process based, non objective, or experimental art, such as Red Groom and the group that were in the 60s. So now we're just a little bit beyond Hoffman and at the Sun Gallery. And so you had two schools of art, really, two kinds of ways of thinking. And remember, this is also pre-photography as an art form. So we're still talking about the 40s to the 60s before Warhol and the happenings,
So
those kinds of
the
things.
Hoffman School in Provincetown was 1938 to
57.
1957. So what would a normal day be like in the Hans Hofmann School of Art here in Provincetown?
Oh, it's a great question. Well, first, very different than the Hawthorne student. The Hoffman students were women of means again,
Wow.
but men that had just gotten back from the war with the GI Bill, and they wanted to be artists, and they felt that was their right. And they said, "Who should I study with? I get to study for free." So Hoffman's school was funded by World War II veterans,
Hmm.
as well as people like Paul Ressica and Robert Henry, who discovered him when they were young in high school. And they came here. So what's a day with Hoffman? He would have models in the morning and in the evening. in New York. Here he had models in the morning and a still life in the afternoon. And that's how people would work. They'd have the figure in the morning, they'd have a still life in the afternoon. And then every Friday night, there'd be a critique. He came in New York, he only came twice a week to his school, but here he was around much, much more.
And it was in his house, right?
It was started at the barn.
At the Hawthorne barn.
It started at the Hawthorne barn, and then he moved it to a studio near his house, like behind his house,
Mhm.
that's now owned by Ryan Murphy. He changed from the barn to his house in the last years.
Mhm.
And then the barn lay fallow almost. Well, actually, Peter G. lived there, but the restored building that we see today happened with 20 Summers.
The barn.
Barn, yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Because Ryan Murphy put a lot of money in restoring the Hans Hofmann house
yes,
just now
and the
recently.
studio,
Yeah.
and Hoffman studio too.
You can look at a lot of architecture magazines and also celebrity magazines because after the house was renovated, Ryan Murphy conducted a lot of interviews with a number of magazines showing the inside of the Hans Hofmann house. And if I remember well, in one of these articles, he also said that he's thriving to collect works that were made by students of the Hans Hofmann School, including Helen Frankenthaler and others.
Well, I'd
And
be dialing that number.
from I read this great book, which you read also, The Ninth Street Women.
Yeah.
A fantastic book about the women of the abstract expressionist movement. And I did a word search, and Provincetown shows up 41 times in that book. So there's a lot of information in there. And I read also in there that he loved Helen Frankenthaler. It was one of his favorite students.
Yes. She was pretty sick of going to school when she met him, and so she only really worked with him for a couple of days, but they hit it off. She was just tired
Mhm.
of school, and he stayed friends with her. And so he would have students, but he would also have friends that weren't necessarily students. And he always dressed the same, these big pants, and he was a big guy, and had a ton of energy. And that's the thing that people realize, the life force in him, the belief that art is so important, it infused all of his students. So some of the students we might know were Robert De Niro Sr., Robert Henry, Paul Ressica,
Is that Robert De Niro's
father.
father? So
Yeah,
Robert De Niro, the actor, his father,
is
was
a
a
painter
painter who was okay. I
who
didn't know that.
studied with Hoffman. Now, what happened with Hoffman when he started at the barn in 1935 to around 1944, 45, it was like the deep abex time. Everybody was making abstract expressionism. And he taught, though, from the figure. So people learned the bones of composition, shape, and form through the figure. And that's how I teach, is teaching abstraction through figure drawing, um, which I learned from Hoffman and then his student, Robert Henry. But the thing that happened was people started yearning for subject matter and meaning again. Uh, and the first person to adopt this was a student of Hoffman's named Jan Mueller.
Okay.
And Jan Mueller did archetypal art, angels flying around. And part of it was that when he was escaping Nazi Germany, his family went through Switzerland and he caught this awful, awful cold and cough. And he is one of the first people to have a pacemaker. So you could hear Jan Mueller coming. I mean, you could literally hear it, like The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. And it created such an urgency in him to make art. And then people were stunned by him. And so people followed him.
Did he have an art school here as well?
He didn't. But at this point, the town as a colony was an open art school. And if you look at it today, we have formal institutions that provide courses like the Fine Arts Work Center and PAM, Provincetown Art Association and Museum, but there's no one main guy anymore or girl that leads the way.
Mhm.
There's many people teaching.
I want to talk about that because I was thinking about that. But before that, I want to talk about something a bit personal. Have you heard about the Tobbs Pierce School of Art?
No.
Well, the Tobbs Pierce School of Art is actually where I live. My house here in Provincetown used to be an art school called the Tobbs Pierce School of Art. It was founded in 1955 and it functioned until 1972. And Friedrich Tobbs, born in 1900, died in 1981, was born in Poland. And as many European artists of that time, war, displacement, so on and so forth, he ended up in America. And he was really a specialist of sort of a classical painting, more academic painting. His idols were from the Netherlands Renaissance, and he was always striving to recreate what they were doing. So that's what he was teaching. And one of his students was Donald Pierce. And Donald Pierce was born in 1926, died in 2010, so not long ago. So together, Tobbs and Pierce founded the Tobbs Pierce School of Art, first in New York, and it was located in the same place where the Juilliard School of Art now is located.
Oh.
And then they opened a school here in Provincetown in 1955. They built my house. And in the house, there's a large room which is slightly reminiscent of the Hawthorne barn. It's smaller, but it still has a wall of northern windows. We have 36 windows in that room, and it's quite large. We can fit quite a lot of people in that room. And that's where they were teaching. And Pierce was doing most of the teaching along with his wife, and her name was Rosalind Stern. Rosalind Stern. She was a printmaker. So they both used the house as their teaching space and working space. And yes, Pierce was doing most of the teaching, but Tobbs was the name that was carrying it. At that point, Tobbs was mostly an author. He had written a lot of textbooks, a lot about art, which were used nationwide. And he also had a regular column in American Artist magazine called the Tobbs Papers.
Hmm.
So he was known as a writer, and people would flock to his name to come to his school, but it was mostly Donald Pierce teaching. And I found a very interesting quote on the internet today about Donald Pierce and Friedrich Tobbs. It's by American artist George Halleck. I'm not familiar with him, but he had written at some point, "I am particularly interested in Donald Pierce, as are most of his students, who like him better than Mr. Tobbs. Of course, it is too soon to judge yet." I guess he was in the process of learning at that point. "It's too soon to judge yet, but it does seem that you get much more direct instruction and concise explanations with Pierce, plus the fact, of course, that with him the subject matter is of our own choice. Mr. Tobbs is much more inclined to waste a lot of our time in generalities on art, and you might say art gossip, much like his column in American Artist." So it's funny because when my partner bought the house in 2018, we were told this was the Tobbs and Pierce School of Art. And since then, we've been trying to find information. It was long lasting, 55 to 72, but there's very little information out there. And it's interesting how very often it's harder to find information about people who were almost our contemporaries than people who were alive 500 years ago.
It's so true.
But I just get little bits of information now and then from Donald Pierce and Friedrich Tobbs. And when we purchased the house, well, my partner purchased the house, he also decided to get some works from them to bring their works back in the house. So we have, I think, 5 paintings from Friedrich Tobbs, which we bought from his son. They were online for sale, and it turns out his son was selling them. And we have one piece also from Donald Pierce, which is a watercolor, a very nice watercolor of a shipyard, which is likely from here in Provincetown. So we don't know too much about them, but if somebody's listening and they know more about the Tobbs Pierce School of Art, I have a lot of personal interest in learning more about it because I live in it. And it's
Yes.
on Franklin Street here in the west end of Provincetown. So that's an interesting note about art schools here.
Yes.
We still have the buildings. They're still around.
They are. And Provincetown is very much defined by its architecture and buildings, as we all know from Building Provincetown, David Dunlap's marvelous photo journey and information. And so when you go to the buildings, you see how many of them were owned by artists, how many of them were the homes of writers. in terms of the history of Provincetown, we're still at a golden age that ends, we're still invested, what I want to say, in the golden age that was Hofmann, 1938 to 57, that time of abstract expressionism. And there was a joke that in that time, everyone from 57th Street in New York was here in the summers. There were very few galleries during that time, only 5 compared to the 70 we have now.
Hmm.
But the thing that has lasted is the purpose of art. And as a community and as an arts colony, what we have done is made art important in a very European way, where to be an artist is considered good, to write, to act. Those are valid ways of living. And that cultural nexus that we are still continues today in a very different way than in the time of Hawthorne or Hoffman, but it is as present and as strong as it's ever been.
And there's still a great interest in learning.
Yes.
There's a lot of people who come here to take classes, for example, at the Cape Cod School of Art, at the Provincetown Art Association Museum, or next doors in Truro at Castle Hill. There's a lot of places to learn, and also the local artists. In my case, I work as a professional artist, but I try at least once a year, maybe once every 2 years, to learn a new technique.
Yes.
And that's almost how I met you, because I'm learning new printing techniques.
Yes.
And at the Fine Arts Work Center, we ended up having residencies at the same time when I was using the print lab and you were working in studio. So it's a great place to learn these different techniques. But yes, as you were saying earlier, we don't have anymore this sort of 1950s style where we have a master that attracts a lot of students. And I think that has a lot to do nowadays with the internet, because these masters don't necessarily need to travel, or the students don't need to travel. They can just take an online lesson with this person. So that has changed the way that people can learn about art.
Right.
But we still have a lot of in-person teaching and learning happening here.
An amazing amount. I mean, there's hundreds of courses a summer here. I have done a lot of study at the Fine Arts Work Center and also work there. And I also work at Berta Walker. And like a lot of artists here, I patch it up. I teach, I lecture, I do gallery hours at the Fine Arts Work Center. I do gallery hours at Berta Walker. I write sometimes, but I am not unique. Many, many artists do exactly what I'm saying. There's artists writing for the Provincetown Independent now. There's artists working at the Fine Arts Work Center and the Provincetown Art Association and Museum. And in most galleries, the person that you meet is also an artist. And so our arts industry remains artist-run as well.
And you are one of the teachers that we have here in town.
Yeah.
So tell us, what do you teach?
I teach Hoffman's push-pull theory.
Okay.
And I teach it because abstraction really is about composition. How do you take 2 dimensions and create excitement with that? Whether it's objective, meaning subject matter, or non-objective, which is the relationship of shapes and forms and color to itself. And in either case, you need to start with a strong composition. The bones of your paper or your painting, it's almost like the foundation of a house or the framework of a house. And Hofmann taught that through teaching figure drawing, which seems so almost an antithesis. But instead of working with rendering, classic proportion, I teach figure drawing through the eyes of Hofmann, which is taking the figure and turning it into form, geometric form, turning it into black and white, pushing things forward and pushing them backward. And so I also teach through the eyes of other artists. So, for example, in June, I'm teaching a class at the Provincetown Art Association and Museum called In the Eyes of Helen Frankenthaler. And so everybody's going to work with these giant pieces of canvas, and the floors will be completely covered in plastic. And you'll learn the technique that she literally invented called the color field.
You're going to be dripping paint all over.
Dripping everywhere.
Yeah.
But I have a phenomenal way of hacking everything up at the end so people don't ruin their cars. And then during the pandemic, I taught with a 21-year-old woman named Alana Barrett, and we taught 50 courses online during the pandemic. And those, because she brought her young energy, we also did color theory. And then we evolved. I would teach the Hofmann push-pull, of course, but we evolved into giving people prompts. And so that's a big thing in writing, but now it's also become a big thing in art.
Mm-hmm.
And we had taught these people color and form and shape and line, and we're like, what else can we do, Alana? And I said, well, let's do prompts. So people would make paintings based on identity, things like identity
Mm-hmm.
or color or line or home. And it was so engrossing for people. So, but what I really teach, and I think why people say I remind them of Hofmann at times, is if someone says they want to paint and they're in my class, I believe them. I really believe them. And I treat them as if this is the most important thing they've ever wanted to learn.
That's wonderful.
And that's really, you can teach method, you can teach technique, but how do you people need to know that someone believes that they can do it.
That's very important.
Yes.
And you were telling me you're going to teach also history?
I'm so excited.
Yeah.
FAWC, the Fine Arts Work Center, which is an international home for artists and writers. And without it, we would not have the international presence that we have in Provincetown, because we attract people from other places through the residency program at the Fine Arts Work Center called the Fellowship. And I will lecture there once a week on Wednesdays about the history of the Work Center, which is incredible. And then I'm going to teach, they're now doing FAWC Online. They are doing an online program that now includes visual as well. And I'm going to teach 9th Street Women in a series of 4 weeks.
The book from Mary Gabriel.
Yes, the book from Mary Gabriel, which took her 20 years to write.
I can imagine. That book is gigantic.
It's gigantic.
It's a fantastic read, but you have to invest a good few months in it.
You do. And like you said, it 41 references to Provincetown just tells you the importance of Provincetown
Mm-hmm.
for the abstract AbX experience.
And I think that's why it's so important to have something dealing with history, that we have somebody teaching history, that we learn history. Because often you have people arriving in Provincetown. Well, I mean, I arrived here in 2016 knowing nothing about the place. And one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast is because I want to learn more. But it's important to know that we are part of a tradition. We're part of a place that has gravitas, that's been an important nexus for art, artists, art history for a century and a quarter. And we have to feel our presence in this continuation, in this tradition. And it's very, very important for us to learn that where we come from and where we're going through this history.
I totally agree. And one of the things, when Hofmann, can you imagine that you aren't allowed to go back to your home in Paris? You aren't allowed to go back to your home in Germany. What does that do to a human being? And he felt that in dark times, which we're in now, that what art does is it preserves us. It preserves our humanity. It gives homage to our creativity, and it gives us dignity. And that in his darkest times, that's what he remembered about his life and his commitment to making art. And I think that Provincetown is almost like a living, breathing organism. Many people think of Provincetown as the way they think about a relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does Provincetown still love me? Should I stay? Should I go? And so that artist spirit lives here. It's obviously very different than in World War II, but not in our reverence for art, and our belief in it is still the same.
And I find it interesting how, whenever you look at historical materials about Provincetown, there's always somebody saying, oh, Provincetown is not the same anymore. They were saying that
Yes.
in the 20s and the 50s and the 70s, and they're saying it now because it's a changing organism. It's something that always evolves, but it doesn't change the fact that it's always at the forefront of the art world. We're always major participants in the art world, even if we don't necessarily feel it in our daily lives. It's an important place to be and to create art.
I totally agree. And many of the people we've spoken about, their art is elsewhere. So, for example, Hoffman's collection of art is in Berkeley at BAMFA, Bay Area Film Archive and Art Museum. So his work is out there. Blanche Lazelle, a seminal two-generation artist that came from Iowa and stayed, and was a modernist in a time. And she was a little person that grew gladiolas. She looked like she made jellies, okay? But she was one of the most important
Yeah.
artists, right? And she came here. Her work is in West Virginia, at a college, a university there, the West Virginia University, and that's where her work is. So because we're such a small place, and with the amount of art that is made here, it's not all going to stay
Mhm.
here. And our art as a culture is all over the world.
It's true. It seems like whenever I visit a museum, because my first priority whenever I go anywhere in the world is to visit their art museums, there seems to always be a painting from Provincetown.
Yes.
Where was I? I was in Portland, Oregon recently, and there was a painting by Helen Frankenthaler called Provincetown Harbor, right there in the museum, one of their main pieces. So, yes, it's all over. But that just shows how art schools were such a great magnet to bring
Mhm.
all these big names here, the art schools and the masters who were teaching there. And it's been a great part of Provincetown's history. And I hope we can keep on learning more about it.
I think it's more rather than just art schools, it's artists that have a commitment to teaching. And there's at least 20 artists here now, in contemporary artists, at least 20, possibly 30, that it is what they do. Teaching art is a part of who they are. And I think rather than art schools, we have art institutions.
Hmm.
And within those institutions, they have their own vibe. So the Provincetown Art Association Museum has a particular vibe about how it teaches and what it teaches. The Fine Arts Work Center has more of a national vibe. It brings people in because there's housing there. And the Castle Hill does much, much more with pottery. They have an amazing ceramic
Well, all
tradition.
my printing classes I've taken at Castle Hill in Truro.
Yes. So I would say it's the arts institutions, but also many established artists are coming here and opening galleries. And so the galleries themselves, while they're commercial, obviously, and people need to make money, they're also an equalizing entry point for learning. And I think in our galleries in Provincetown, we embody that we're not just talking about the work on the walls today, we're talking about the work that was on the walls and the artists that did come before us. Do you agree with me now? It's more institutions than
Yeah,
official schools,
that sounds right.
except for the Cape Cod School of Art, which is still
Still
here.
there, 126 years
I
later.
know. Amazing.
It is. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've learned
Yeah.
so much, and I hope our listeners have learned a lot more about the legacy of art schools, art teachers, art institutions in Provincetown. Thank you so much, Laura,
You're welcome.
and I look forward to seeing you again soon. And
Thanks for having me.
my pleasure. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And until next show.